Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So it's another Wednesday in December, meaning that I'm going to be picking from my Instagram tag and choosing to draw another 2 OCs that you guys have submitted for me to draw in my own style. So the first one that we are going to be drawing today is from Mytha7081, who submitted this OC, who's really cute and is another, I believe, gacha character. So I think I mentioned this last week as well when I was drawing another set of characters that you guys have submitted, but the gacha OCs have been kind of fun to draw lately just because there are a little bit more, I guess because they're so simple, there's more for me to interpret and figure out in terms of how I want to draw it in my style. But with that being said, it is kind of like a higher chance for me to butcher your OC just because I could be getting a lot of the details wrong, so I do apologize in advance if I did do that. So for the pose, I decided to once again simplify kind of like what I wanted for the composition or the pose of the character to be with a larger brush. I went ahead and lowered the opacity so we can go ahead and start with the kind of more cleaner sketch. Now I'm going to be cutting out quite a bit of footage here because I ended up adjusting the character's eyes quite a bit because I kept changing either the shape of the eyes or the direction where the character is looking because I was a little bit still iffy in terms of how I wanted to draw the character's pose because I was still kind of like determining the character's personality a little bit because there's only kind of a visual reference for the character. There's no description or anything, no name attached to the character. So I'm just going off based visually on what I think the character would be like. So hopefully I'm not too off. So I find it a lot easier for myself to kind of simplify a lot of the shapes in terms of doing the pose with a larger brush so I don't get into like the nitty-gritty details before I start to do my cleaner sketch, which I'm doing right now. And I feel like I didn't realize this when I was drawing kind of like today's 2 different characters. I'm only doing 2 today because I only had time to do 2 more for today's session, but hopefully because there's only 2 Wednesdays left in December, I will try my best to fit as many as I can in the last 2 sessions. So if I can, maybe I'll do 3 and 3, or if I'm really ambitious, maybe I can do 6. We'll see. Like per video, I guess. We'll see what happens. I don't think I'm going to do the chibis like I said I was going to try to do. There's just not enough time in the month of December to do so, so I think I'm just gonna stick with drawing as many characters in my style as I can for the rest of the Wednesdays in December. Also, if you're planning to submit your OCs or anything like that to the Instagram hashtag, you can go ahead and find the part 1 version of these. I think it's from 2 Wednesdays ago, so you can find that one. It has like picture of I think a green haired OC in that one as the thumbnail. So yeah, you can check that one out if you wish to submit your OCs to the specific hashtag that I'm checking on Instagram. So other than that, as we kind of progress on with the sketch, I did kind of have a hard time interpreting kind of the clothing a little bit because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do kind of like a bomber jacket. Did I want to do more of like a sports letterman jacket? Did I want to do a cardigan, kind of puffier sleeves, or did I want to go with a hoodie? So looking at the character's design a little bit, I determined that it's not going to be a hoodie, and I was leaning more towards kind of a fully zipped up kind of jacket look, kind of like a letterman jacket or something like that, like a jersey jacket. But I decided that I would separate the kind of white main part to be the inside shirt and then the kind of outside to be more of a cardigan. Now I feel like this is probably a wrong interpretation of the outfit just because there is some kind of like zipper or seam that goes down from the shirt all the way down to kind of like the base of the jacket. But I think I realized too late, and I realized when I started to render the characters, so I decided to leave it as how I initially interpreted the outfit. So it is probably wrong, but you know, it's kind of how I initially saw it at first, so I'm probably not going to change it. But yeah, moving on to the kind of background. So for the previous characters, for the most part, I did more of a kind of blocky or chunky, very flat color style for the background. So I'm going to continue it because I didn't really want to focus too much on the background for the character. So to kind of make it a little bit easier for myself, I just picked some colors that I think that would fit the color palette for the character a little bit, and then I went ahead, made a new layer, and then kind of blocked in with one color the shape and silhouette of the entirety of the character that's already been sketched out, so that when we are about to color, I can go ahead and alpha lock it, and we can kind of keep all of our shading and highlights and everything kind of contained to the area that I've placed down this kind of beigeish yellowy color. So what kind of drew me to wanting to draw this character? One, I was kind of looking to draw another gacha OC just because, like I said, it's kind of fun interpreting the character from some more simplified stylistic choices that the kind of style of gachas tend to be. But the hair is something that I really liked because I never really do kind of like half updos, nor do I draw a lot of buns on characters, but I did like either the hair accessories, or I guess it could be spikes from the hair as well that's coming from the buns were kind of cute. But then I also like the simplicity of just doing a black and white kind of clothing aesthetic for the character, because I get to play around a lot with just playing around with the colors in terms of if I want to push more warms or cools, or I want to push it away from being too neutral, I can really play with the color temperature there. So kind of for like the white of her shirt, I pulled colors from her skin tone, which made it a little bit more warmer. It kind of has that orangey hue, and then I pulled some colors from the background, which kind of gave it a little bit more of that cooler tone back into it. But I did kind of start off with a more cooler neutral base in terms of kind of blocking in the shadows initially. So for the eyes, I end up forgetting to render in more of the pupil. So luckily I did add like the majority of the color that I wanted to before rendering, but I also think the eyes look kind of cute without having to, I guess, too stark of a difference between her eye color and her pupils. It just made it look a little bit cuter in a sense. So even though it was a mistake on my part, it did kind of work out in the end. So for both of these drawings, I did not end up kind of rendering to the fullest degree, and I did this for like the other ones as well, so I kind of wanted to keep up with that just because I do want to render them up to the same kind of finish for the most part. And I'm debating that maybe next week's session I'm gonna think of how I want to format it, but I would like to tackle some of the OCs that were done, probably ones that did not have color or anything like that, just because I do want to give a fair chance to people who maybe don't have supplies to color their drawings, or you know, supplies that are not like easier access. So some people did submit, I believe, some graphite drawings, so maybe I'll take a look at some of those and we can do some more, I guess, black and white versions or more monochromatic pieces to help represent that, and people can still get their OCs drawn that way. So coloring. The hair, I did struggle a little bit. I feel like blonde and white hair tend to be kind of like a few of the colors that I struggle with in terms of coloring for hair, just because I don't want to push the white hair to look too off color by adding too much dark colors for shadow. And then something similar for like blonde or light hair like this, if I put too many darker shadows that are very punchy, very dark, very prominent, they become too significant to the hair, where I find it too difficult to discern what is the hair color for the character. So I did keep a lot of my values for the shadows to be fairly light, but I tried my best to keep it interesting by adding different hues. So I did add a little bit more of pink tones alongside with the orange, and then I shifted a little bit to purple and grabbed some of that blue from the hair so that I could, or not from the hair, from the background to the hair, so that we can introduce a little bit of that color as well, just because it kind of helps with the entire piece to feel a little bit more cohesive by adding some of the background colors into the character. So, you know, it just helps us a little bit to tie them together. Okay, so I kind of talked over the part where I merged my layers and I changed the line work color, or my sketch, I guess, and I went ahead and started to do the rendering, or the cleanup phase in this case. So after I switched the sketch color to be a little bit more softer and a little bit more appropriate, that's kind of why the eyes got a lot lighter rather than having a very dark pupil. And like I said, I did not end up darkening it at the very end because I actually started to like what it looked like at this point. I don't know if it's just because I forgot or I thought it was finished at that point, but I did not fill in the pupil. But for the most part, when I start on the face, I like to work on the mouth, I like to work on the jawline, the eyes, and usually the bangs at this point, because it's easier for me to find places for me to pick darker colors and kind of darken up some of the corners and kind of pull the face forward more, just because I start to darken up and refine a lot of those features. And then after that, I'll kind of shift my attention to usually the hair. And then after the hair, I would move on to the clothing, and then I kind of flip-flop back and forth to whichever place that I feel like I would like to work on more. And this is purely out of like whatever I feel like working on, because I do a lot of flip-flopping, and even though it's more efficient for me to probably work on one area then move on, so that I don't do so much flip-flopping and kind of breaking the flow a little bit, so I end up revisiting a lot of the same places over and over again. So I guess it's more like for efficiency, if anything, because if I'm not doing it for time's sake or like a deadline or for a video, I don't really mind, and I kind of just let my brain go and I can just render and do whatever. But whenever I see myself kind of like watching back my footage and seeing myself flip-flop between working on the clothing, working on the hair, working on the clothing, working on the hair, it just makes me a little frustrated, because I'm like, can you just finish one area first and then move on? So hopefully it's not too distracting for you guys as well. So there are some little design aspects that I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to include. So they're kind of like a little hearts or dot designs going up the either jacket or cardigan, and I did not sketch them in prior because it'll be easier for me to color in without bothering to have any kind of sketch or line work. So I did them afterwards, and hopefully kind of following a little bit more where I placed my initial shadows for the cardigan. I'm calling it a cardigan just because that's how I kind of drew it. One little last thing I wanted to do is kind of to add a drop shadow, but make it white to kind of outline the character a little bit from the background, not in a too distracting way, but just kind of a little bit so that it stands out from the background and doesn't kind of meld into it too much. But I think that's it for this character, and I'll go ahead and show you guys the time lapse via my Procreate, and then I'll show you guys the cleaner time lapse, and then we can move on to the next character. So I'll see you guys in a bit. So slowly moving on to the next OC. So let's go ahead and make a new canvas, which is still the 5x7. And this OC is submitted by Kaji_Pudding. And I believe this is their OC Kaji. So yeah, I really adore the outfit, and I wish I could have included more of the outfit. Also, the footage that you're seeing right now is sped up because I am going to be scrapping this pose. I was having a little bit of a hard time trying to think of how to include, I guess, like their weapon. I don't know if it's supposed to be kind of like an axe of some sort or if it's supposed to be more like a scythe, but regardless of what it is, I still wanted to include it somehow into the composition for the character, just because it would kind of make the composition a little bit more interesting. I also think it's a little bit neat to have it with the character, just because for the most part I tend to draw only, I guess, like waist up or headshots for the characters anyways, so this kind of just helps break that a little bit. So I did scrap the first pose because I was having a hard time whether or not I wanted to make the character more side facing, front facing, back facing alongside with the scythe, but I also thought that the scythe would have been cut off and it would make a very weird I guess like the way how it cuts into the canvas is very strange, so I would have shrunk the character even more, but I knew that I would have spent way too much time rendering small details if I shrunk it even more than the 5x7 canvas that I was working with, so I decided that I would just switch up the pose to this one. So I wanted the character to be kind of looking more upwards at us, and then still kind of have the kind of scythe weapon visible, because we're kind of getting almost like an aerial view-ish of the character, so I wanted to have that as a way to view the body a little bit more, because we're having a little bit more of that down view of the character, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it correctly, but it was like a way for me to think of kind of how I wanted to include the weapon in a way that doesn't feel like the weapon's too short, or I don't know. I didn't really want to do an action pose because I'm very rusty and I feel like I should do more gestures in my sketchbook. So maybe if I did more of those, then maybe we can tackle more of an ambitious pose next time. But for now, so I did forget to talk about the character's outfit a little bit more. I really like the character's outfit. I tend to like very formal outfits of anything, and I believe the character is more kind of like a butler, so I was kind of already drawn to the kind of aesthetic of the character right off the bat. Also, this is kind of purely out of coincidence because I didn't notice it, and you might have noticed that I initially drew in the hand holding in the kind of the staff portion, or like the little rod portion of the scythe, and I didn't notice that the two characters that I drew today did not have hands visible. So the first character had their sleeves entirely covering their hands, so I drew it as such, but this character also has very kind of puffy ruffled sleeves that kind of cover their hands, so I did the same thing and made him kind of grip the scythe with the same method of having their hands just be entirely covered. So there were no hands drawn today other than the one that kind of briefly showed up before promptly erasing it after realizing that I drew characters that both had sleeves covering their hands. So same process in terms of how I did the coloring. So I did do the background kind of more of the color blocky way. I decided to switch it to blue and yellow just because there is a little bit of kind of gold in the character. I don't think it's like a significant amount, but I thought yellow could be also a fun addition to add to the highlight to the hair, which you'll probably see a little bit later. After I did the background, I went ahead and kind of blocked in the character like I did for the first one. Alpha locked it, so it made it easier for me to stay within kind of like my sketch lines at this point. I also forgot to change my sketch to multiply and change the color so it appears a lot softer before I start to shade and color. But with all those kind of out of the way, we can go ahead and start to shade the face for the most part, do some of the other details. We'll move on to the eyes, hair, and clothing. And I think I talked about this in a previous video that I do have a method in terms of my order of how I color things, because usually skin tends to fill up majority of the areas that are under the clothing, under the hair. It's technically below the eyes in my brain, so it makes it easier for me to be messy and kind of block that in first. Then I be a little bit more cleaner whenever I block in the hair, because I need to make sure that the hair isn't going to be overlapping on visible skin, but I can cover a lot of that kind of excess color around the face. So I would do the hair next, and then after that I would do clothing, which covers up the entirety of the rest of the skin that might be exposed. So it just makes a lot of cleanup easier if I do it this way, rather than if I did skin last and try my best to keep everything contained and not touching, let's say like the hair or the neck area to like the collar, or let's say the sleeves if the hands were exposed. Moving on to the hair, so I didn't really have any dramatic lighting for this one, so I kept the hair kind of simple, and I didn't really do the usual if I have like a light source in mind that I would make things lighter, the mid-tone color, and then like my shading color kind of all at once before putting in more detail. So for this one I did do more of a base color. I had the color bleed into the face a little bit, and then I did shadows, and then for the highlights I kind of mixed in kind of a more muted mid-tone blue, and then I added some blue from the background, added the yellow to the background so that it's kind of throughout the piece a little bit. And you can see that this kind of weird dull greenish color is actually a mixture of that yellow from the background alongside with the kind of bluish color that I have for the black to kind of make it look a little bit less monotone. It also helps break up the figure a little bit so that things don't meld into one another in terms of having a black sleeve over top of the black of his jacket or his hair. Hopefully that's all making sense. I'm realizing that I tend to film these super late. I don't think you'll see the times on my Procreate or on my phone, but I tend to film these like past 1 a.m. So sometimes I feel like whenever I do these voiceovers, I feel a little delirious. I don't think I'm getting like the best amount of sleep at the moment, but I'm trying to push through because I know the holiday season tends to get the busiest for both, I guess, like balancing workload, friends, and family, and just having enough time to do all of them. So I'm trying my best to not sacrifice sleep every time, but I also just feel like I run better on less sleep. But clearly, as I'm doing this voiceover, I feel like it's suffering a little bit more, the fact that I'm doing this past 1 a.m. again, because it's 1:47 in the morning, but that's okay. In terms of the rendering, so yeah, for the most part, I am trying my best to clean up everything. I'm also adding more darker colors to the places where I feel like need to have a little bit more value. So I usually do this in corners. I also try my best to kind of clean up shadows around the face, especially. So you saw that I added more shadows to where the hair kind of touches the, I guess, like the start of the nose, I guess, or like between his eyes, just because I want to create a little bit more of that depth instead of the hair looking like it's flatly placed on top of the face. There's a little bit of a gap if I put that shadow there. But other than that, I think the coloring portion's pretty straightforward for these ones, just because I did not make them too complicated. I made sure that the colors were, at least for the most part, to me, very easily discernible in terms of how I wanted to separate things or how I wanted folds to look and all that. I've been having a little bit of a struggle in terms of finishing a lot of my recent artwork. I haven't posted that much to my other socials in terms of like other artwork, just because I have like a few whips that are just unfinished to the point where I just need to render them for the most part. So maybe later on this week, if I have time, I will record another Keep Me Company video and we can finish those whips together, because I have one that's like VTuber related. So I have one that's like Reimu and Petra together, and then I have one that's Ensemble Stars related, which is of Tsukasa from Ensemble Stars, and it's kind of like of a pose that I've been having sitting in a folder for a long time, and I'm finally revisiting it, but it takes a very different turn. So I would like to show that at some point. But also another one that I wanted to finish is one that I did of Fremine, which I kind of did randomly after seeing another work in progress or like a random sketch that I had in my Genshin folder. So I have 3 unfinished pieces that one's like partway through the rendering cleanup process, and then the other ones are kind of like just finished with the colors. I think one has effects on it. I think it's the Tsukasa one, but then the other one I just put the base colors and the shadows and like all that. Basically like the rough colors are done. So hopefully if I do end up making another Keep Me Company video, that one will be basically me doing the rendering process for 3 different pieces, which I think could be neat, but I don't know, you guys can just work alongside me when I work on those pieces, because I kind of need an extra push to finish them. And I definitely think sometimes recording myself for a video kind of pushes me to finish the drawing in a more timely manner, because some of those whips have been sitting there for way too long and I really need to get them out of kind of my work in progress dungeon of a gallery. So yeah. But in terms of the rest of this piece in particular, I did not render it to the full degree like I mentioned for the other one. I don't know, I don't think this one really needed to. I definitely think there are areas that I tend to focus on more, like the face and the hair, versus on some other places like some of these pieces of fabric or the ruffles, or I forget what this is called, but like the ruffles around the neck kind of area. I did not put so much detail or effort into it, and I apologize that it looks a little rough, but for the most part I didn't want these to be like fully finished pieces because I know I will get burnt out. But hopefully I didn't butcher your guys' characters too much, and I think we're pretty much at the end for this one too. Just a few areas that I would like to spruce up in terms of the hair, and I know I would fix the highlights a little bit too. But I do like the colors for this character. I also think the outfit's kind of fun. I wish I could show more of the outfit off, and I had like half a mind to doing chibi versions for these ones instead, so that I could play around with the outfits and the posings a little bit more in a whimsical way, because chibis are just fun to pose and can kind of show the body a little bit more quickly in terms of drawing, just because they're more condensed. But yeah, here is the little time-lapse replay of the last character that I'm doing for today's little drawing session. So hopefully you guys enjoy watching me draw both of the characters of today, and thank you again to both Maitha and Kaji for submitting your OCs, and I hope you guys like the drawings, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!